Jazz. The day they betrayed me was the day I thought my life was over. I had trusted them with everything. My heart, my dreams, my future, and the life I had spent years building. Then, in one moment, Jazz, they took it all away. They expected me to fall apart. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg them to stay. And honestly, for a while I almost did, Jazz. Because when the people you love the most become the reason you can't sleep at night, you start questioning everything. You question your choices. You question your worth, Jazz. You question whether all those years you spent loving someone were ever real. But what they didn't know was that betrayal has a strange way of changing people. Sometimes it destroys you. Sometimes, Jazz, it makes you bitter. And sometimes it introduces you to a version of yourself you never knew existed. My name is Emily, Jazz. And this is the story of how the people who broke my heart accidentally gave me the strength to rebuild my entire life, Jazz. But before I tell you how I became stronger, you need to understand how completely I trusted them, because my story didn't begin with betrayal. It began with love. At least, that's what I thought, Jazz. I was 29 when I married Daniel. Everyone said we were lucky. We had met at a small coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. I remember that day clearly. I had been running late for work, Jazz, carrying too many papers in one hand and trying to balance a cup of coffee in the other. Then I bumped into someone. The coffee spilled, the papers fell everywhere, and when I looked up, there he was, Jazz. Daniel, instead of getting angry, he smiled. He helped me pick everything up. Then he looked at the coffee covering his shirt and said, "Well, I guess that's one way to introduce yourself." I laughed, Jazz. That was the beginning. For the next 3 years, Daniel became my best friend. He was the person I called when something good happened. He was the person I called when something went wrong, Jazz. When I was afraid, he told me everything would be okay. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of who I was. At least, that's who I believed he was. We got married on a beautiful spring morning, Jazz. There weren't hundreds of people, just our families, a few close friends, and the people we believed would always stand beside us. I remember looking at Daniel that day and thinking, this is it, Jazz. I found my home. I didn't know that years later, I would look back at that same moment and wonder how I could have been so blind. The first few years of our marriage were wonderful, Jazz. We built a small life together, nothing extravagant, just simple happiness. Weekend breakfasts, late-night conversations, Roman road trips, little arguments that ended with laughter, Jazz. I started a small online business selling handmade home decorations. Daniel had a stable job at a growing company. We weren't rich, but we were happy, or at least Abby was, Jazz. Then things slowly started changing. At first I didn't notice. Daniel started coming home later. Work is crazy, he'd say. I believed him. Then he started keeping his phone with him all the time, Jazz. At dinner, on the couch, even when he went to another room for a few minutes. I noticed, of course I noticed. But I didn't say anything because when you love someone, you don't want to believe the worst, Jazz. You find explanations for them. You protect them from your own doubts. You tell yourself they're tired, they're stressed, they're busy, Jazz. You convince yourself that everything is fine because the alternative hurts too much. Then one evening, Daniel came home almost 3 hours late. I was sitting at the kitchen table. The food was cold, Jazz. I had been waiting for him. When he walked through the door, I looked at the clock. "You're late." He didn't even look at me. "Long day, Daniel." He stopped. Something in my voice made him turn around. "What's wrong?" I stared at him. "I feel like something has changed." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, not warmly, not lovingly, Jazz. It was the kind of laugh people use when they want to make you feel foolish for asking a question. "Emily, you're imagining things." Maybe I was. That's what I told myself. That night, I apologized. Jazz. I apologized for being suspicious. I apologized for asking questions. I apologized for making him uncomfortable. I didn't know that was the first time I was apologizing for something I hadn't done. Jazz. And that became a pattern. Whenever I asked questions, I became the problem. Whenever I expressed concern, I was too emotional. Whenever I said I felt distant from him, he told me I was being dramatic. Jazz. Slowly, I began doubting myself. Maybe I really was imagining things. Maybe marriage was supposed to feel this way. Maybe people simply changed. But then came the day that changed everything. Jazz. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were usually my busiest days. I had spent the entire morning preparing orders for my business. Around noon, I received a message from Daniel. Jazz. Don't wait for me tonight. I have a late meeting. I stared at the message. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. There was no reason, just a feeling. Jazz. I put my phone down and tried to continue working. But 20 minutes later, another message appeared. This time, it wasn't from Daniel. It was from my sister, Sarah. Emily, can we talk? Jazz. I called her immediately. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then she sent me a photo, one photo. That's all it took. My entire world stopped. I opened it. And there he was, Daniel. Jazz. Standing outside a restaurant. With Sarah. My own sister. They weren't doing anything obvious. They didn't need to. The look on Daniel's face told me everything. It was the same look he used to give me. Jazz. The soft smile, the way he leaned toward her. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. My hands started shaking. I couldn't breathe. Jazz. I stared at that picture for what felt like an hour. Then another message appeared. I'm sorry. That was it. No explanation, no excuse. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I wanted to call Daniel. Jazz. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, but something stopped me, and that was the first decision I made that would eventually change my life. I didn't call. I didn't confront him. Jazz. I didn't cry in front of him. I simply put my phone down, and for the first time in years, AB became completely silent. That evening, Daniel came home at 10:47. Jazz. He walked through the wood door like nothing had happened. Hey, he said. I looked up from the couch. Hey, he smiled. I told you I'd be late, I know. He walked toward the kitchen, then he stopped. Jazz. You're okay? I looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my husband. I was looking at a stranger wearing the face of the man I loved. I'm fine, I said. Jazz. And that was the first lie I ever told him. But it wasn't the last, because that night, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, not because I wanted revenge. Jazz. Not because I wanted to punish him. I needed to know how much of my life had been a lie. So I started paying attention. And what I discovered over the next few weeks was far worse than I had imagined. Jazz. The messages, the late nights, the secret conversations, the excuses, they all started making sense. But there was something else, something I never expected. Jazz. Daniel wasn't the only person hiding something from me. Sarah was too. My own sister. The person I had trusted since childhood. The person I had defended my entire life. She knew everything. Jazz. And she had been hiding it from me. But the biggest shock was still waiting for me. Jazz. Because when I finally discovered the real reason Daniel and Sarah had been meeting behind my back, I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about something much bigger. Jazz. Something that could change the future of my entire family. And that's when I understood. The people who thought they had destroyed my life had no idea what I was about to become. For 3 days, I said nothing. Not to Daniel, not to Sarah, not to anyone. I went through my normal routine as if my entire world hadn't just collapsed. I woke up, I made breakfast. I worked on my business. Jazz. I smiled when I had to, and every night, I slept beside a man who had become a complete stranger, but inside I was falling apart. The hardest part wasn't knowing that Daniel had betrayed me, Gaz. It was knowing that my sister had been part of it. I kept asking myself the same question. How could two people I trusted more than anyone else do this to me? I wanted answers, but I also knew something, Gaz. If I confronted them too early, they would lie. They had already been lying for months, maybe even longer, so I decided to wait. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew there was more, Gaz. And I was right. The first thing I discovered was a second phone. It happened completely by accident. One evening, Daniel went outside to take a call. His main phone was on the kitchen counter, Gaz. A few minutes later, it vibrated. I glanced at the screen. A message appeared. "Did you tell her yet?" My heart stopped. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. A second message appeared. "Gaz, we can't keep doing this forever." Then another. "She deserves to know the truth." I felt my hands go cold. Who was this person? What truth, Gaz? And why was someone talking about me? As if I were the last person who deserved to know what was happening in my own life. Daniel came back inside. I immediately looked away. He picked up his phone, Gaz. Then he looked at me. For 1 second, our eyes met. I don't know if he saw something in my face, maybe he did, because he suddenly asked, "Are you okay?" I smiled, "Just tired." He nodded, "Gaz." And that was it. Later that night, when he was asleep, I heard his phone vibrate again. I opened my eyes. Daniel didn't move. I stared into the darkness. The old Emily would have reached for the phone, Gaz. She would have checked everything. She would have demanded answers the next morning. But the new Emily, the woman betrayal was slowly creating, did something different. She waited, Gaz. I knew that if I acted emotionally, I might lose the only chance I had to understand what was really happening. So I stayed still, and eventually I fell asleep. The next morning, Daniel left early, Gaz. As soon as his car disappeared from the driveway, I went upstairs. I opened the closet. I began searching. I didn't know what I was looking for. But after 20 minutes, I found it, Gaz. A small black bag hidden behind an old suitcase. Inside was a phone. My heart started beating faster. I picked it up. There was no password. That should have been my first warning. I turned it on, Gaz. There were dozens of messages. Most were from Sarah. I opened the first one, and I immediately felt sick. "Daniel, you need to be honest with her." Another. "This isn't fair to Emily." Another. "Gaz, she has a right to know." I scrolled through the messages, and slowly, everything started to change. Sarah wasn't secretly dating Daniel. She wasn't trying to steal my husband, at least, Gaz. Not in the way I had imagined. Something else was happening. Something I couldn't understand. Then I found a conversation from 2 weeks earlier. Daniel had written, "If Emily finds out now, she'll never forgive me." Sarah replied, "She deserves the truth, Daniel. You can't keep hiding it." Then Daniel wrote something that made my entire body freeze. "It's not just about the money anymore, Gaz." "Money? What money?" I kept scrolling. There were conversations about bank accounts, betrayal accounts, and one name appeared again and again. My father's name, Gaz. My father had passed away 6 years earlier. I had spent years trying to move on from losing him. He had been the person I trusted most in the world. And suddenly, Gaz, his name was appearing in secret conversations between my husband and my sister. I sat down on the floor. I couldn't move. My father had left me a small inheritance. Nothing huge, Gaz. Just enough to help me start my business. I had always believed that was the end of the story. But apparently, it wasn't. I kept reading. Then I found a photograph. It was a picture of a document, Gaz. My father's signature was at the bottom. I recognized it immediately. But there was something wrong. The date. The document had been signed almost a year after my father had died. I stared at it, Gaz. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. How could my father's signature be on a document dated after his death? Then I noticed my name, Emily Carter. My name was listed as the owner of a property, Gaz. A property I had never heard of. I read the document again and again. Then I saw the address. My heart nearly stopped. It was the address of the house where I had grown up, Gaz. The house my father had sold years before he died. The house I believed belonged to someone else. Why was my name on the documents? And why had Daniel been talking about it, Gaz? I suddenly understood something. The betrayal I had been worrying about wasn't the real betrayal. There was a much bigger secret, and my husband and my sister had both known about it. Gaz, I needed to know more, so I did something I never thought I would do. I followed Nail the next morning. I told him I had a busy day. He kissed my forehead. I'll see you tonight. I smiled. Gaz. Of course. But instead of going to my office, I followed him. I kept my distance. My heart was racing. I felt like I was doing something wrong. But then I remembered the phone, the documents, Gaz. My father's name. I kept driving. Daniel eventually stopped outside a law office. I parked across the street. He walked inside. 20 minutes later, Sarah arrived. Gaz. I watched them enter the building together. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My sister, my husband, together, Agan. I wanted to storm inside, but I didn't. I waited. Almost an hour passed. Gaz. Then the door opened. Daniel came out first. Sarah followed. They were arguing. I couldn't hear everything, but I could see the tension on their faces. Then Sarah said something. Daniel suddenly stopped. Gaz. He looked terrified. Sarah pointed toward the building. Then she said something that I could barely hear through my closed car window. But I heard enough. You promised my father. My heart stopped. Gaz. My father? Why was Sarah talking about my father? Daniel looked around nervously. Then he said, Not here. They got into separate cars. I waited until they drove away. Then I entered the law office. Gaz. I walked to the receptionist. Excuse me. She looked up. Yes, I'm here about a property document. She smiled politely. Do you have an appointment? No. She shook her head. I'm sorry. You'll need to schedule one. I almost turned around. Then I noticed a man walking down the hallway. He looked at me, then suddenly stopped. His face changed. Emily, I froze. I didn't know him. Yes? He walked toward me. I'm Michael. I stared at him. Michael who? He looked confused. Then he said something that made my heart sink. Michael Bennett. Bennett, my father's lawyer, Gaz. The man I had seen at my father's funeral. The man I hadn't spoken to in 6 years. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked, Didn't your husband tell you? I felt my heart drop. Tell me what, Gaz? Michael's face went pale. He looked toward the door, then back at me. Emily. What? He hesitated, then he whispered, Your father didn't leave you the inheritance you think he did. I stared at him. Gaz. Then what did he leave me? Michael took a deep breath. Something much more valuable. I couldn't speak. He continued, Your father owned a company. I shook my head. No, yes, I would have known, Gaz. Your father made sure you wouldn't. Why? Michael looked at me. Because he was afraid someone would try to take it from you. My entire body went cold. Who? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he asked me a question. Emily, when was the last time you spoke to your husband about your father's business? Never. Michael looked shocked. Then you need to sit down, Gaz. I followed him into his office. He closed the door. Then he opened a file. Inside were documents, old documents, new documents, and one photograph. My father was standing beside a much younger Daniel, Gaz. I stared at the picture. I couldn't breathe. Why is my husband in this? Michael looked at me. Because Daniel has known about your father's company for years. Gaz. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. That's impossible. Michael shook his head. I'm afraid it's not. I stared at the photograph, Daniel, my father, together, Yaz. Years before I had ever met Daniel. Then Michael said something that changed the entire meaning of my marriage. Your father didn't trust Daniel. I looked up. What? Yaz. He specifically warned me about him. My heart was pounding. Why? Michael opened another document. Because your father believed Daniel was trying to get close to your family for financial reasons, Yaz. I couldn't speak. Everything I had believed about my life was suddenly falling apart. My marriage, my sister, my father, my business, everything was connected. Then I saw one final document. Yaz. My father's handwriting was on the last page. Michael pushed it toward me. This was meant for you. I looked at him. Why didn't I get it? He lowered his voice. Yaz. Because your father instructed me to give it to you only when you were ready. Ready for what? Michael stared into my eyes. To learn the truth about your husband. I looked down at the letter. Yaz. My hands were shaking. I opened it. The first line was written in my father's handwriting. And the moment I read it, Abby realized something. My father had known. Yaz. He had known that one day Daniel would betray me. He had known that my sister would be involved. And he had prepared something long before any of us understood what was happening. Yaz. The letter began with 7 words. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. Yaz. Because I suddenly knew whatever was written in that letter would change my life forever. And the truth inside it would force me to make a choice. Yaz. A choice between the woman I had been and the woman I was about to become.